Welcome to Terrifying Storytales. Tonight we share a chilling story perfect for those who like a little scare before sleep. If you enjoy our stories, please like and subscribe for more. Let's begin our journey into the night. Story 1. Jenna's house was usually a cozy spot where she loved to read in peace. But as dusk turned into night, something strange broke the quiet. She heard her name, Jenna, whispered so softly it almost got lost in the silence of the house. At first, Jenna thought her mind was playing tricks, but then she heard it again, closer and clearer. It was no trick. Someone was whispering her name. Feeling a chill, Jenna stood up. She called out, "Who's there?" The house stayed silent, her heart beating fast. Jenna decided to look around. The air grew colder as she walked. The floorboards groaned under her steps, as if they didn't want her there. Jenna checked every room. Everything looked right, but the house felt wrong, like eyes were watching her. Back in her living room, the whisper came once more. "Jenna, come here." The voice seemed to float around her, coming from all sides. Jenna spun around, searching for anyone or anything, but saw nothing. Then, right next to her ear, as if someone was standing very close, she heard a chilling whisper, "Don't go." That was enough to make Jenna run. She dashed to the door, flung it open, and didn't stop running until she was outside, under the streetlights. Panting, she looked back at her once beloved home, now sitting dark and silent against the night sky. Standing there, Jenna realized the real scare wasn't the thought of ghosts or unknown whispers. It was the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes, the sense of never being alone, even in her own home. She walked away, the whispers echoing in her mind. Jenna knew some things, once stirred to wake, might never rest again. Story 2. Ella had just moved into a small cabin in the woods, seeking peace away from the city. The first few nights were quiet, almost too quiet, which Ella found perfect for her writing. But on the third night, things changed. As the clock struck midnight, Ella heard a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on her front door. She paused, her pen frozen above the page. The woods was supposed to be empty. Her nearest neighbor was miles away. Curious and cautious, Ella approached the door. "Who's there?" she asked. No answer came, only a chilling silence that seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. Feeling a mix of fear and boldness, Ella opened the door. To her surprise, the porch was empty, swallowed by the dark night. She stepped outside, her eyes scanning the dense trees. "Is anyone there?" she called into the darkness. No answer, just the whisper of the wind through the leaves. Ella shivered, not just from the cold air, but from the feeling that something unseen was watching her. She hurried back inside and locked the door. Unable to shake off her unease, Ella went back to her writing, trying to focus on her words. But then came another knock, louder this time, impossible to ignore. Ella stood up, her heart racing. She went to the window next to the door and peered out. There, in the faint moonlight, she saw footprints in the snow leading up to her door, but no footprints leading away. Whoever, or whatever, had knocked was still there, just beyond her sight. The air grew cold as Ella heard yet another knock, this time sounding like it came from inside the house. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, fearfully, she turned around. The room was just as she had left it. Nothing amiss, except for one chilling detail. Her own writing on the wall, in letters dripped down like blood. "Never alone." Ella grabbed her coat and keys, left the cabin, and drove away, without looking back. As she glanced in her rearview mirror, the cabin faded into the dark, and with it, the terrifying sense that she would never be alone again. Story 3. Tom had always enjoyed the solitude of his lakeside cottage, a retreat from the hectic city life. The days were filled with serene views and the nights with the calming sounds of the lake. But one evening, something different broke the calm. A soft, sad melody drifting over the water. Intrigued, Tom stepped onto his porch, looking out across the misty lake. The melody grew louder, more haunting. It seemed to be coming from the old boathouse at the edge of his property. With only the moon to guide him, Tom walked down to the water, the melody pulling him forward. As he approached, the door to the boathouse creaked open, revealing nothing but the dark, still waters inside. "Hello?" Tom called into the darkness. No reply came, only the echo of his voice against the old wooden walls. The melody had stopped, replaced by the sound of gentle waves lapping against the shore. Feeling a chill, Tom stepped inside, his flashlight cutting through the blackness. There, in the far corner, was an old piano, its keys faintly moving as if touched by invisible hands. As he drew closer, the melody resumed, soft and melancholy. Mesmerized, Tom reached out to touch the piano. The moment his fingers brushed the keys, the air grew icy and the melody shifted, a chilling tune that seemed to seep into his bones. Suddenly, the room filled with whispers, voices of those long gone, all speaking at once, too quick to understand. Tom stumbled back, his heart pounding, as the piano played faster, the voices growing louder. Without thinking, Tom ran from the boathouse, not stopping until he was back inside his cottage. He locked the door and stood, breathless, listening. The melody had followed him, now just outside his window, soft and sad once more. That night, Tom didn't sleep. The melody continued, a ghostly serenade that wouldn't let him forget the voices in the boathouse. When morning came, the music stopped and the lake was silent once again. But the whispers never truly left Tom. Night after night, they returned with the melody, a reminder of the night he played the piano that played itself. And though he tried to ignore them, some nights, it seemed like the whispers were not just from the past, but also calling him back to the water. Story 4. Lilla had just moved into an old Victorian house on the edge of town. The house, with its towering gables and sprawling porches, had stood empty for years, its history a tapestry of tales and rumors. Lilla, drawn to its charm and mystery, decided it was the perfect place to start anew. The first few days were spent unpacking and setting up her new home. But as she settled in, Lilla began to notice odd occurrences. Doors would creak open on their own, and cold drafts meandered through the halls, even on windless days. One chilly evening, while Lilla was reading by the fireplace, a sudden chill swept through the room. The fire flickered as if struggling against an unseen wind, and then, as quickly as it came, the chill passed and the fire steadied. Puzzled, Lilla chalked it up to the old house's quirks. That night, as Lilla climbed the grand staircase to her bedroom, the air turned icy again. The hallway was dimly lit by the soft glow of nightlights, casting long shadows that danced on the walls. Halfway up, Lilla paused, feeling as if she were being watched. Turning slowly, she scanned the shadows. Nothing. As she continued up, the temperature dropped further, and the faint sound of music drifted to her ears. It was a piano, playing a slow, melancholic tune that seemed to echo from the depths of the house. Intrigued and unnerved, Lilla followed the music to a small room hidden behind a moving bookshelf on the second floor. The room was untouched by time, dust motes dancing in the moonlight that slipped through a cracked window. There, in the center of the room, sat an ancient piano, its keys moving softly under unseen fingers. Transfixed, Lilla approached the piano, drawn by the haunting melody. As she reached out to touch it, the music stopped abruptly, and the room fell silent. Heart racing, Lilla felt the air thicken, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Then, from the piano, a single note rang out, clear and sharp, cutting through the silence. Lila recoiled, stumbling backward as the room grew colder, the shadows seeming to swell. Without a second thought, Lila fled from the room, the note ringing in her ears. She raced down the stairs, out of the house, and didn't stop until she reached the safety of the street. Breathing hard, Lila looked back at the house. Its windows stared back like dark, knowing eyes. The piano's note echoed in her mind, a chilling reminder of the house's hidden depths. Though she returned to the house the next day, the room with the piano was sealed, the bookshelf immovable, as if it had never opened. Lila often heard the faint strains of music in the night, a ghostly serenade that whispered of secrets locked within the old Victorian's walls. Story 5. On a stormy night, Eva decided to explore the attic of her newly inherited countryside mansion. As lightning flashed and thunder rumbled, she found herself drawn to the mysterious artifacts and old trunks filled with forgotten belongings of her ancestors. Among the dust-covered items, Eva discovered an old leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. Intrigued, she opened it to the first page, where a faded photograph of a woman remarkably similar to herself was tucked. The woman's eyes, dark and intense, seemed to look right through her, sending a chill down Eva's spine. As she flipped through the journal, Eva found it belonged to a woman named Eliza, dated back to the late 1800s. The entries began cheerfully, detailing daily life and local events. However, as Eva read on, the tone shifted. Eliza wrote of unsettling dreams and eerie occurrences, shadows moving against the walls, whispers in the dead of night, and a feeling of being watched. Feeling a connection with Eliza, Eva continued reading, the storm outside mirroring the growing turmoil in the entries. Eliza's descriptions grew more frantic, detailing a hidden room in the attic where she felt an inexplicable pull. Curious and slightly apprehensive, Eva looked up from the journal, her eyes scanning the dimly lit attic. That's when she noticed a small, obscure door behind a heavy armoire she hadn't seen before. Compelled by the story, she pushed the armoire aside with effort, revealing the door just as described in the journal. With a deep breath, Eva opened the door, revealing a small room bathed in the blue light of the storm. Inside, there was a painting on the far wall of the same woman in the photograph, her eyes seeming alive and even more intense. As Eva stepped closer to the painting, the air grew cold, and the whispers Eliza wrote about filled the room. They grew louder, forming a word, "Look." Eva reached out and touched the painting, and as she did, the room suddenly went silent. The storm outside ceased abruptly, and a heavy book fell from a shelf to the floor, opening to a page that read, "Thank you for freeing me." Shaken, Eva quickly left the room, resealed the door, and moved the armoire back into place. That night, the mansion was calm, and the eerie feelings ceased. However, Eva often dreamt of Eliza, who thanked her in dreams for setting her spirit free, her eyes no longer filled with fear, but with peace. Story 6. Mark had always been fascinated by the stars. When he inherited an old observatory on a remote hilltop from his great-uncle, a renowned astronomer, he was ecstatic. The building was outdated, but held a massive, antique telescope that was said to show more than just stars. His first night there, Mark eagerly aligned the telescope with the celestial map his great-uncle had left. As the stars twinkled into view, he noticed a small, obscure star pulsating oddly. He adjusted the lens, trying to get a clearer view, when suddenly, the star seemed to burst, sending a ripple of colors across the lens. Startled, Mark stepped back from the telescope. The air in the observatory grew cold, and a faint whisper echoed around him, "Watch closely." Intrigued, and unnerved, Mark looked through the telescope once more. This time, the view shifted, revealing not the sky, but a room that mirrored the observatory. In it, a figure much like himself was adjusting a similar telescope. As Mark watched, the figure paused and looked straight at him, its eyes reflecting a depth of darkness deeper than the night sky. The figure pointed towards the ceiling of its room, where a strange cosmic swirl of lights danced. Mark looked up at his own ceiling but saw nothing. When he returned his gaze to the telescope, the figure was gone, and the star field had returned to normal. Shaken, Mark noted the coordinates and decided to research the star. The next day, he discovered the star was named after his great-uncle and was not listed in any official records. It was as if it existed only for them. That night, and many nights after, Mark observed the star, but it never pulsed again like that first night. However, he often felt a presence, a whisper in his ear, urging him to keep watching. Over time, the observatory became more than a place to watch stars. It became a portal, showing Mark visions of other places, other times, as if the universe itself were revealing its secrets to him. Each vision left him with more questions, each whisper a clue to unraveling the mysteries of the cosmos. Story 7. Sarah, an avid collector of antique dolls, received a peculiar invitation to visit an estate sale in a forgotten old town. The invitation listed various artifacts but mentioned a unique collection of dolls that caught her attention. Upon arrival, the estate felt suspended in time, shrouded in an overgrowth of wild plants. The air was thick with the scent of moss and wood. Inside, the house was dimly lit, each room filled with relics of the past, but it was the dolls that drew Sarah in. They were displayed in a secluded room, each doll dressed in Victorian attire, with glassy eyes that seemed almost lifelike. As Sarah examined each one, she noticed that despite the room's stillness, there was a subtle, unsettling movement. The dolls seemed to be watching her, their eyes following her every move. Compelled by a mix of fascination and fear, Sarah reached for a particularly old doll, wearing a faded red dress. Its eyes were deeper than the others, almost calling to her. As she touched it, a cold wind swept through the room, and the doll's eyes blinked. Startled, Sarah dropped the doll, which landed upright, staring back at her. The room grew colder, and the faint sound of giggling echoed around her. The dolls' heads had all turned, now facing Sarah directly. Panicked, Sarah fled from the room, but as she ran through the hallways, she heard the pitter-patter of tiny feet behind her. Glancing back, she saw the dolls slowly following her, their faces twisted in sinister smiles. Sarah managed to escape the house, slamming the door behind her. Breathing heavily, she looked back through the window. The dolls were there, pressed against the glass, watching her leave, driving away. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She knew she had escaped something unexplainable, something dark hidden within those dolls. That night, and many nights after, Sarah dreamt of glassy eyes and tiny footsteps, always feeling watched, never alone. Story 8. Daniel had always been drawn to the sea. When he inherited a rustic lighthouse keeper's cottage on a remote cliffside, he saw it as a retreat, a place to write and to think, surrounded by the endless murmur of the ocean. The cottage, with its weathered walls and salt-stained windows, had a stark beauty. Daniel spent his days walking the cliff's edge and his evenings writing by the crackling fire. But as the days shortened and the nights grew longer, Daniel began to notice an odd light flickering on the horizon. Each night, at precisely midnight, a green flash would appear over the water, lingering for just a moment before fading into the darkness. Intrigued, Daniel set up his telescope, determined to uncover its source. Through the lens, he saw not a ship or a reflection, but a small, uninhabited island that wasn't on any map. The flash seemed to originate from a cavern on the island's rocky shore. Compelled by curiosity, Daniel rented a boat one foggy morning to explore the island. As he approached, the green light pulsed gently, guiding him through the mist to the cavern's entrance. Inside, the air was cool and damp. Daniel's flashlight beam danced over ancient carvings on the walls, depicting celestial alignments and tides. At the cavern's heart, he found the source of the light, a large, luminescent crystal embedded in the rock, pulsing with a life of its own. As he drew closer, the crystal's light grew brighter, engulfing the room. Overwhelmed by its intensity, Daniel stumbled backward, his mind flooded with visions of the sea's history. Ships passing in the night, storms raging, and lighthouses guiding the way home. Shaken, Daniel left the island with more questions than answers. The visions haunted him, each one a whisper of the sea's secrets. He knew the crystal was more than just a beacon. It was a keeper of stories, ancient and ever-changing. Each night, back at the cottage, Daniel watched the green flash with new understanding. He continued to write, his stories now infused with the tales the sea had shown him. Tales of courage, loss, and the eternal dance of waves against the shore. Story 9. Nathan, a young historian, was drawn to a small, seemingly forgotten village on the coast, known for its lost maritime legends. His interest was particularly piqued by the legend of the ghost ship, a vessel said to appear every full moon, shrouded in mist and without a crew. On a chilly evening, with a full moon illuminating the sea, Nathan walked to the ancient pier, the old wood creaking underfoot. As the moon reached its zenith, a thick fog rolled in from the sea, enveloping everything in a damp, ghostly haze. As he waited, the air filled with the salty tang of the sea and a faint, melancholic melody, like a call from the deep. Peering into the fog, Nathan's breath caught as the outline of a ship began to form. It was an old galleon, its sails tattered and ghostly pale, floating silently towards the shore. Compelled by a mix of dread and curiosity, Nathan watched as the ship neared. It seemed ethereal, its form flickering in the moonlight, as if it were not entirely of this world. Remembering the tales, he knew this might be his only chance to learn the ship's secrets. As the ship drew alongside the pier, Nathan stepped closer. The deck was deserted, the ship's wheel turning slowly, as if guided by invisible hands. Overcoming his fear, he climbed aboard. The wood felt strangely solid under his feet, and the air was filled with the echo of long-lost voices. Nathan explored the ship, finding remnants of its last voyage, maps to uncharted waters, trinkets from distant lands, and a captain's log, open and waiting. The log was filled with entries that spoke of a beautiful cursed treasure brought aboard from a forsaken island, which brought doom to all who touched it. Suddenly, a chill wind swept through the ship, the pages of the log fluttering wildly before settling on the last entry. May this curse end with us, lost to the sea. The ship began to fade, the edges becoming mist, the form blurring. Realizing the ship was returning to its phantom state, Nathan hurried back to the pier. As he stepped off, the ship dissolved completely into the fog, leaving no trace behind, except for the captain's log in his hand, real and heavy with truth. Story 10. Emily had always been fascinated by the supernatural, her curiosity fueled by old family stories of spirits and hauntings. Her great-grandmother had left her a seemingly mundane gift, a small, antique key with an intricate design, accompanied by a letter that spoke of a hidden door in the family's ancestral home, a door that had been locked for generations. Driven by a blend of intrigue and ancestral duty, Emily visited the old mansion, a sprawling structure cloaked in ivy and shrouded in mystery. She arrived as dusk painted the sky in shades of purple and gray, the mansion's silhouette imposing against the twilight. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and forgotten secrets. Emily's footsteps echoed through the halls as she searched for the hidden door described in her great-grandmother's letter. It was supposedly located in the mansion's oldest part, where the shadows lay thickest and the air felt charged with a silent anticipation. After hours of searching, Emily found a strange, uneven paneling along a dimly lit corridor. Her heart raced as she fit the antique key into a nearly invisible keyhole. The lock clicked open with a heavy, echoing sound that made her jump. Slowly, she pushed the door open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. With nothing but a small flashlight to guide her, Emily descended. The air grew colder with each step, a deep chill that seemed to seep into her bones. At the bottom of the staircase was a small, circular room with walls covered in ancient runes and symbols that shimmered faintly in the flashlight's beam. In the center of the room, a stone pedestal held an old book, its cover leather-bound and etched with symbols that matched those on the walls. As Emily approached, a sense of overwhelming dread filled the air, the shadows around her seeming to pulsate with a life of their own. She opened the book to the first page, and the room trembled slightly, dust falling from the ceiling. The book was a grimoire, filled with spells, incantations, and detailed accounts of spiritual encounters that blurred the line between this world and the next. As she read, Emily felt the temperature drop further, her breath visible in the air. Whispers filled the room, echoing around her in a language she couldn't understand, but felt deep in her soul. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if urging her to read aloud from the grimoire. Compelled by a force she couldn't resist, Emily began to recite the incantations. The room spun, the walls blurring into streaks of light and shadow. She continued, her voice no longer her own, deeper and echoing against the stone. The air crackled with energy, a storm of spiritual power that she had unwittingly unleashed. Suddenly, from the dark corners of the room, figures began to emerge. They were shadows, but not void of form, detailed and horrifying. Faces twisted in pain and sorrow, bodies contorted into impossible shapes. They reached for her, their hands cold and desperate. Panicked, Emily snapped the grimoire shut, and the room fell silent, the figures vanishing as suddenly as they had appeared. She raced up the staircase, the echoes of her steps, a frantic rhythm in the oppressive silence of the mansion. Back in the safety of the main hall, Emily locked the hidden door, her hands trembling. She knew she had disturbed something ancient, something that was meant to remain hidden. The whispers didn't follow her out, but they lingered in her mind, a constant, unintelligible murmur. As she left the mansion, Emily looked back once, seeing the shadows at the windows, watching her leave. She drove away with the grimoire in the trunk of her car, sealed within a box, lined with salt and bound with red thread, as her great-grandmother's letter had instructed for containing evil. That night, Emily didn't sleep. The shadows from the mansion seemed to linger around her, clinging to the edges of her vision. She knew she had to return the grimoire to its pedestal, to lock away the darkness she had unleashed. But the thought of descending those stairs again, of facing those twisted spirits, filled her with an indescribable fear. Story 11. In the heart of an ancient forest, where the trees whispered old earth secrets and the mist never fully cleared, stood the ruins of Corvin Manor. Local legend spoke of the manor as a place cursed by its last lord, a reclusive alchemist obsessed with finding the gateway to another realm. Liam, a writer with a penchant for the paranormal, ventured into the forest, drawn by the tales of hauntings and unexplained phenomena reported at the ruins. He arrived as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the towering trees. The air around Corvin Manor was cool and still, as if the forest itself held its breath. Liam's footsteps crunched on the carpet of fallen leaves as he approached the crumbling stone walls and the skeletal remains of what was once a grand estate. Setting up his camp just outside the ruins, Liam planned to document his experiences overnight. He set out his equipment, cameras, voice recorders, and an EMF meter to detect any signs of supernatural activity. As darkness enveloped the woods, Liam felt a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The normal night sounds of the forest ceased, and a suffocating silence took their place. He started his voice recorder and spoke into the stillness, introducing himself and his intentions to any spirits that might be listening. For hours, nothing happened. Just as Liam began to doubt the stories, a sudden cold gust swept through the ruins, and his EMF meter flickered wildly. He grabbed his camera and recorded as the air around him shimmered with a faint, unnatural mist. Then, the whispers started. Soft at first, so Liam could barely catch them, but gradually they grew louder and clearer. They seemed to echo from the walls themselves, in a language he couldn't understand, but felt disturbingly familiar. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, Liam followed the whispers to what remained of the manor's library. Here, the shelves were bare, but in the center of the room lay a large tome, its cover bound in faded leather with strange symbols etched across it. As Liam approached the book, the whispers crescendoed into a single, urgent voice. It was as if the book was speaking directly to him. He opened it, and the pages glowed faintly, filled with arcane writings and diagrams that shifted and changed as he tried to focus on them. The voice grew louder, urging him to read aloud from the book. Despite his better judgment, Liam found himself reciting the words, the ancient incantations vibrating in the air around him. The ground trembled, and a blinding light filled the room, emanating from a crack that appeared in the floor. From this fissure, shadows surged forth, swirling around Liam, their forms vague but terrifying. They whispered of forgotten times and lost worlds, their voices a cacophony that drowned out all reason. Panicking, Liam slammed the book shut, and the light extinguished as suddenly as it had appeared. The shadows dissipated, but the crack in the floor remained, a dark, gaping maw that seemed to breathe. Heart pounding, Liam packed his equipment and fled the ruins, the whispers of Corvin Manor chasing him through the woods. He didn't stop until he reached his car, glancing back just once to see the mist swirling, as if the forest was reclaiming the manor once more. Back home, Liam reviewed his recordings. The video was static-filled and indistinct, but the audio captured the whispers, their urgency chillingly clear, even now. He published his findings, his account of Corvin Manor becoming a sensation among paranormal enthusiasts. However, Liam couldn't shake off the feeling that something had followed him back. At night, he heard whispers, and sometimes, just out of the corner of his eye, he saw flickers of shadows. The manor had given him a story, but it had taken something in return, his peace. Story 12. In a fog-shrouded town, the abandoned lighthouse stood as a monument to forgotten times. Legend had it that its last keeper, Old Man Craven, had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, his spirit bound to the lonely tower overlooking the sea. Rachel, a local photographer drawn to the eerie, decided to capture the essence of the desolate structure. As night fell, she entered the lighthouse, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air was musty with decay, and the silence was broken only by the creaking of the old structure swaying with the wind. Ascending the spiral staircase to the lantern room, Rachel noticed a strange phenomenon, a faint glow emanating from the beacon, pulsing like the heartbeat of the sea. Intrigued, she took a photograph, and the flash momentarily lit up the room. To her horror, the spectral figure of Old Man Craven appeared before her, his eyes like deep-sea voids, his expression one of deep sorrow. He was gazing out at the ocean, then turned slowly to face her, mouth moving in a silent warning. Rachel snapped one more photo before the figure vanished, leaving her in stunned silence. Spooked and eager to escape, she rushed down the stairs. As she reached the bottom, the door slammed shut with a forceful gust. Panicked, Rachel pushed against the door until it flew open, releasing her into the night's foggy embrace. Once home, Rachel developed her photographs. Each image was more disturbing than the last, showing Craven's ghostly form looking out to sea and then turning towards her, his hand raised in a silent, chilling warning. Story 13. Tom was a curious boy who loved exploring. Near his home, there was a creepy old house that everyone in town said was haunted. They told stories about strange noises and ghost sightings. Tom had always wanted to see if the stories were true. One evening, Tom decided it was time to explore the old house. He waited until it was getting dark, then he took a flashlight and went to the house. As he walked up to it, the house looked scary under the moonlight, and the windows looked like dark eyes watching him. He pushed the creaky door open and stepped inside. The house was dusty and full of old furniture, covered with white sheets. Tom felt a chill as he walked through the dark rooms. Suddenly, he heard a noise upstairs. It sounded like someone was walking. Feeling brave, Tom slowly climbed the old wooden stairs. They creaked loudly under his feet. At the top of the stairs, he saw a door slightly open. He pushed it, and the door swung open with a loud squeak. Inside the room, it was very cold, and Tom could see his breath. He shined his flashlight around and saw an old mirror on the wall. As he looked into the mirror, he saw a shadow move behind him. Tom spun around, but there was nothing there. When he looked back at the mirror, he saw a face looking back at him. It wasn't his face, it was pale and sad. Tom was really scared now. He ran from the room, down the stairs, and didn't stop until he was out of the house. He looked back once and thought he saw a curtain move in the window, like someone was watching him leave. Tom never went back to the old house again. He told his friends about what he saw, and they all agreed it was a real haunted house. Now when he passes by, he always keeps looking at it, wondering about the sad ghost in the mirror. Story 14. Anna loved walking through the woods near her house. It was peaceful and beautiful. But there was one part of the woods she never went to, the old bridge. People said it was cursed. They told stories of a ghostly woman who appeared at midnight looking for something she lost long ago. One day, Anna's dog, Max, ran off into the woods while they were walking. Anna called for him, but he didn't come back. She followed his barking and found herself near the old bridge. It was getting dark, and she was worried about Max. She heard barking from the other side of the bridge. Anna was scared, but she loved Max too much to leave him. She took a deep breath and walked across the bridge. The wood creaked under her feet, and the river below sounded loud and angry. When she got to the middle of the bridge, she saw Max on the other side, wagging his tail. But then she saw something else. A woman in a white dress, standing near Max. The woman was looking at Anna, but her eyes were sad. Anna froze. She remembered the stories. The woman began to walk towards her, reaching out her hand. Anna wanted to run, but her feet wouldn't move. As the woman got closer, Anna could see that she wasn't scary. She looked like she needed help. The woman stopped in front of Anna and spoke in a whisper. "Have you seen my locket?" Her voice was so sad that Anna felt sorry for her. Anna shook her head, and the woman looked down at the river. Then she faded away, like mist. Anna ran across the bridge, grabbed Max, and didn't stop running until they were out of the woods. When she got home, she told her grandma about the woman. Her grandma listened and then went to an old box and took out a small gold locket. Her grandma said, "I found this by the bridge when I was a little girl. Maybe it's time to give it back." The next day, they went back to the bridge together. Anna placed the locket in the middle of the bridge and stepped back. At midnight, Anna and Grandma watched from a distance as the ghostly woman appeared. She saw the locket, picked it up, and smiled. Then she looked at Anna and her grandma, nodded her head, and disappeared. The curse of the old bridge was broken. Story 15. Sarah had always been drawn to the sea, the endless blue, the sound of the waves. It called to her. Near her coastal home stood an old sailor's pub, rumored to be haunted by the ghost of Captain Elliot, a sailor who never returned from his last voyage at sea. One stormy night, driven by a mix of curiosity and bravery, Sarah decided to visit the pub. As she entered, the old wooden door creaked loudly, swinging shut behind her with a thud. The inside was dimly lit, with old nautical maps and ship wheels decorating the walls. Sarah sat at the bar, ordering a warm drink. The bartender, an old man with a weathered face, leaned in and said in a hushed tone, "They say Captain Elliot returns on stormy nights, searching for his lost ship." His eyes flicked toward the window where lightning flashed, illuminating the sea. Intrigued, Sarah sipped her drink, her eyes scanning the room. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the pub, even though no doors or windows were open. The candles flickered, and a shadowy figure appeared at the end of the bar. It was a man, dressed in an old sailor's coat, his hat pulled low over his eyes. The room fell silent, all eyes on the figure. Sarah felt a chill down her spine. The figure raised his head, revealing a weathered, bearded face that looked as though it had been carved from the sea itself. He looked at Sarah and spoke in a deep, echoing voice. "Have you seen the Storm Rider?" His eyes were like deep ocean waters, dark and mysterious. Sarah, though frightened, shook her head. The figure nodded slowly, his gaze turning back toward the sea, his expression sad and longing. The air grew colder, and the ghostly sailor began to fade, becoming part of the mist that rolled in from the ocean. As he disappeared, the candles flickered back to life, and the warmth returned to the room. Sarah left the pub, her mind racing. The image of the ghostly sailor was etched into her memory. She knew she would return, hoping to learn more about Captain Elliot, and perhaps help him find the peace he seemed to be searching for. Story 16. Jenny always loved the thrill of exploring haunted places, and the old Milltown Theatre was next on her list. Abandoned for decades, it was said to be haunted by the ghost of a once famous actress, Laura Bell, who vanished on the night of her greatest performance. Armed with only a flashlight and her camera, Jenny entered the theatre late one evening. The lobby was filled with the dust of ages, and old playbills littered the floor. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the grand staircase leading to the main hall. As Jenny ascended the stairs, a faint sound of music drifted down to her. It was a soft, melancholy piano piece that seemed to come from the theatre itself. Intrigued and a bit unnerved, Jenny followed the music. It led her to the main auditorium, where the stage was bathed in an unnatural, ghostly light. There, seated at a dusty piano, was the translucent figure of a woman in a long, flowing gown. Her fingers moved gracefully over the keys, her eyes closed as if lost in the music. Jenny realized this must be Laura Bell. The music filled the room, echoing off the walls with a haunting beauty that sent shivers down Jenny's spine. Mustering her courage, Jenny approached the stage, her camera ready. She called out softly, "Laura." The music stopped abruptly, and the ghostly figure turned to look at Jenny. Her face was sad but beautiful, and her eyes seemed to plead for understanding. "I just want to hear your story," Jenny said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. Laura Bell looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She turned back to the piano and began to play again, the music softer this time, filled with longing and loss. Jenny took several photos, each capturing the ethereal beauty of the scene. As the final note of the music faded, Laura Bell gave Jenny a small, sad smile before fading away, leaving the stage empty and the room silent. Overwhelmed by what she'd witnessed, Jenny left the theater. She developed the photos, which showed Laura Bell at her piano, her figure glowing with a soft light. Jenny shared her story and the pictures online, where they quickly went viral among paranormal enthusiasts. The old Milltown Theatre received new interest, with many people visiting to feel the presence of Laura Bell and perhaps catch a glimpse of her ghost. Jenny continued her explorations, always respectful of the spirits she encountered, always searching for the stories they had to tell. Story 17. Mark had always been curious about the old farmhouse at the edge of town. It was abandoned, with boarded-up windows and peeling paint. People said that at midnight, lights flickered inside and laughter could be heard. One night, Mark went to see if the stories were true. He got there just before midnight. Under the moonlight, the farmhouse looked even spookier. Right at midnight, a soft light started glowing inside. Mark heard old-time music playing from an old radio. He pushed the front door open and stepped inside. The house was cool and smelled dusty. He followed the music to the living room. An old radio was playing lively dance music from the 1920s. Mark felt a chill even though the music was upbeat. He walked around the house and saw fresh footprints and new candles. He went upstairs, following the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. It seemed like a ghost party was happening in one room. Mark peeked into a room where the laughter was loudest. It was empty, but sounded full of people. Suddenly, everything went silent. Mark ran out of the house, scared and confused. He never understood what happened that night. His photos showed nothing but empty rooms. Now, whenever he passes by the farmhouse, he sometimes hears music and laughter, reminding him of that mysterious night. Story 18. Emily always walked past the old Bolton mansion on her way home. The mansion was grand, but run down, with stories of its haunting dating back generations. They said the ghost of Lady Bolton roamed the halls, mourning her lost love. One foggy evening, Emily's curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to peek inside. She found a window that wasn't completely sealed and looked through. Inside, she saw a faint glow of light moving through the halls. Gathering her courage, Emily found a door slightly ajar and slipped inside. The mansion was silent, except for her footsteps echoing on the wooden floors. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and dust. As she walked through the main hallway, she saw the light again. It was a candle, floating in the air, moving as if carried by an unseen hand. Emily followed it, her heart racing with both fear and excitement. The candle led her to the grand ballroom. The room was empty, but as she entered, the air grew colder, and she heard a soft, sorrowful wail. The candle set itself down on a dusty piano. Suddenly, the keys began to move, playing a slow, sad melody. Terrified but unable to move, Emily watched as a transparent figure appeared by the piano. It was Lady Bolton, dressed in a gown from another era, her face sorrowful. She seemed to be searching for someone in the room, her eyes looking right through Emily. The music stopped, and Lady Bolton turned to face Emily. She reached out, and Emily felt a chill pass through her. Lady Bolton's lips moved, whispering, "Help me," before she vanished into thin air, leaving Emily alone in the silence of the ballroom. Emily ran from the mansion, her heart pounding. She didn't stop until she was safe at home. She never went inside the Bolton mansion again, but she often stopped by the gate, wondering if Lady Bolton was still inside, waiting for someone to help her find peace. Story 19. Lucas had always been intrigued by the old clock tower in the center of town. It had stopped working years ago, but there was a tale that at midnight the clock would chime one last time for those who listened closely. Driven by curiosity, Lucas decided to visit the tower one chilly evening. As the town slept, he made his way to the tower, the moon casting eerie shadows across the cobblestone streets. Just before midnight, Lucas stood beneath the towering structure, looking up at the motionless clock hands. The air was still, and the silence was almost tangible. As the clock neared midnight, Lucas's anticipation grew. Suddenly, there was a faint sound, a slow, mechanical whirring, as if the clock were coming to life. Lucas watched in awe as the minute hand twitched slightly. Then, as the town's old church bell struck 12, the clock tower did the unimaginable. It chimed. The sound was not loud, but clear and beautiful, resonating through the quiet night. It chimed just once, a haunting, melodious note that seemed to hang in the air. As the echo of the chime faded, Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. He looked around, half expecting to see someone else who had heard the chime, but he was alone. Or so he thought. From the shadows near the base of the tower, a figure emerged, an old man, dressed in the attire of a bygone era, holding a large, rusty key. He looked at Lucas with a sad smile and said, "Thank you for listening." Before Lucas could respond, the old man turned and walked back into the shadows, disappearing as mysteriously as he had appeared. Lucas ran to the spot where the old man had been, but there was no sign of him. Shaken and bewildered, Lucas returned home. He never heard the clock chime again, but he often returned to the tower at midnight, hoping to catch another glimpse of the old man with the key, to understand who he was and why the clock chimed for him. Story 20. Alan had always been fascinated by the legend of the Whispering Woods. It was said that anyone who ventured into the woods at night could hear whispers that revealed their deepest fears and desires. Despite the warnings, Alan's curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to experience it himself. One misty evening, Alan stepped into the woods, his flashlight casting eerie shadows among the twisted trees. The deeper he went, the quieter it became, until the only sound was the crunch of leaves underfoot. As midnight approached, Alan stopped in a small clearing. The air grew colder, and a subtle whispering sound began to fill the air. It was soft at first, barely audible over the rustling of the leaves. But as he listened more closely, the whispers grew louder and clearer. Alan could hear voices, dozens of them, each telling secrets and stories. Some voices were pleading, others taunting. Each whisper seemed to speak directly to him, echoing his own hidden thoughts and fears. The voices became overwhelming, and Alan felt a chill that wasn't from the cold. It was as if the very soul of the woods was speaking to him. He tried to leave, but the paths seemed to twist and turn on their own, always leading him back to the clearing. Panicked, Alan ran, the whispers growing louder with every step. Then, suddenly, a voice louder than the rest called out his name. It was a deep, sorrowful voice that begged him to stay. Alan stopped, heart pounding, and turned back to the clearing. There, in the dim light of his flashlight, he saw a figure. It was shadowy and indistinct, but it seemed to be reaching out to him. The figure spoke with the same deep, sorrowful voice, telling Alan of a lost love and a curse that bound it to the woods. Overwhelmed by fear and pity, Alan promised to return to the woods to learn more about the figure and its story. As soon as he made the promise, the whispers stopped, and the path home appeared clear before him. Alan returned home that night, shaken but unharmed. He knew he would keep his promise. The woods had revealed their secret, and now he was a part of their story. Story 21. Grace had heard the legends of the old lighthouse on Cliffside Bay all her life. They said it was haunted by the lighthouse keeper who vanished many years ago. On stormy nights, it was told one could see a light flickering at the top, guiding non-existent ships to safety. Driven by a mix of bravery and curiosity, Grace decided to visit the lighthouse one stormy evening. As she approached, the wind howled and the sea churned violently, waves crashing against the cliffs with thunderous force. She entered the lighthouse and climbed the narrow, spiraling staircase. The air inside smelled of salt and old metal. At the top, the lamp room was surprisingly intact, with the great glass lens throwing shadows on the walls. As the clock struck midnight, the lamp suddenly lit up with a pale, ghostly glow. Grace watched, astonished, as the room filled with the spectral light. Then she heard footsteps, slow and heavy, coming up the stairs. The door creaked open, and there stood the figure of an old man, translucent and shimmering in the dim light. He was dressed in a weathered sailor's coat and cap, his beard long and white. His eyes, deep and sorrowful, met Grace's with a weary recognition. "I'm Thomas," he said, in a voice as rough as the sea, "the keeper of the light." He moved to the lamp, his hands passing through the objects as though they were mist. "I must keep the light burning," he continued, "lest the ships lose their way." Grace, captivated by his presence, asked, "Why do you remain?" Thomas looked out at the raging sea. "My ship never returned, and my crew was lost to the waves. I wait for them, keeping the light alive, in hope they might find their way home." Moved by his tale, Grace promised to return, to keep him company through the lonely nights. Thomas nodded, a ghostly smile crossing his features. As dawn approached, he faded into the morning light, leaving the lamp to darken once again. Grace left the lighthouse, her heart heavy, yet filled with purpose. She returned often, keeping vigil with Thomas, sharing stories through the stormy nights. Story 22. Nora was drawn to the old Henderson house, rumored to be haunted by Mr. Henderson, who searched its halls for his lost fortune. One twilight, curiosity led her through its creaking gates and into the dusty shadows within. The house groaned under the weight of silence as Nora explored. Her flashlight's beam trembled across the grand staircase to the second floor, where the air turned icy. In Mr. Henderson's study, the door slammed shut behind her, stirred by an unseen force. A whisper floated through the room, emanating from a shadowy figure at the desk. It was Mr. Henderson, spectral and sorrowful, murmuring about his lost fortune. Moved to help, Nora searched with him. A hidden panel in the wall revealed a small safe. Inside were the lost bonds, Mr. Henderson's long-sought treasure. With a grateful nod, the apparition faded, whispering thanks. Nora, heart pounding with both fear and triumph, left the mansion, her path lit by moonlight, and the weight of history slightly lifted. Story 23. In the heart of the village stood the old Whitmore estate, abandoned after a mysterious fire decades ago. Legend had it that the mansion was cursed, haunted by the spirit of Lady Whitmore, who was seen roaming the charred ruins at night. Tom, a local historian and paranormal enthusiast, couldn't resist the lure of the Whitmore legends. Armed with a camera and a flashlight, he ventured into the estate one foggy night, determined to capture evidence of the supernatural. The mansion loomed ominously against the night sky, its silhouette broken by jagged windows and scorched timbers. Tom's footsteps echoed on the cracked pavement as he approached the main hall, the air thick with the smell of mold and burnt wood. Inside, Tom's flashlight flickered as he explored the ground floor, moving through rooms filled with shadows and debris. The atmosphere was oppressive, as if the mansion itself was aware of his presence. Climbing the unstable staircase to the second floor, Tom heard a soft sobbing sound echoing through the hallways. Following the sound, he entered what remained of the grand ballroom. There, in the moonlight streaming through a broken window, stood the apparition of Lady Whitmore. She was dressed in a once elegant gown, now tattered and covered in soot. Her face was sorrowful, and her eyes were filled with unshed tears. Tom, transfixed by the sight, raised his camera and snapped a photo just as she turned to look directly at him. "Why do you disturb my sorrow?" she whispered, her voice a melancholic echo in the vast, empty room. Tom, taken aback but sympathetic, replied, I seek to understand your story, to share it so others might know your truth. Lady Whitmore looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then know this, she began, her voice growing stronger. I am bound to this place by regret and unfulfilled promises. Tell my story, perhaps one day I may find peace. With those words, she vanished, leaving Tom alone in the silent ruin. He left the estate with not just a photograph but a mission, to tell the tale of Lady Whitmore, hoping it might help her spirit find rest. Story 24. Sarah had always been drawn to the mysteries of the old Miller Library, a grand but now dilapidated structure said to be haunted by the ghost of its founder, Jonathan Miller. Local lore told of Miller's spirit seen wandering the library's aisles, still organizing books long after his death. One rainy evening, driven by a mix of curiosity and bravery, Sarah decided to visit the library. She entered through the creaking main doors, her lantern casting a soft glow that barely pierced the overwhelming darkness. As she walked through the main hall, the scent of old paper and musty wood filled the air. The silence was profound, broken only by the patter of rain against the stained glass windows. Sarah ventured deeper into the library, her footsteps echoing softly. Suddenly, she heard the faint sound of pages turning. Following the sound, she found herself in the heart of the library, surrounded by towering shelves filled with ancient books. There, in the dim light of her lantern, she saw a figure, a man dressed in an old-fashioned suit, his hair silvered with age. He was browsing through the books, his hands carefully turning each page. Realizing she was not alone, Sarah whispered, "Mr. Miller." The figure paused and slowly turned to face her. His eyes, kind but filled with an eternal sadness, met hers. "Yes, it is I," he replied, in a voice that seemed to echo from the past. "I cannot leave this place, not yet." "Why can't you leave?" Sarah asked, her voice a mixture of fear and fascination. "I am bound here by my life's work, unfinished and unappreciated. I seek someone to understand, to cherish these tomes as I once did." Moved by his plight, Sarah promised to help. She spent the night in the library, reading aloud from the books, sharing their stories and secrets. As dawn broke, Jonathan Miller's spirit appeared more peaceful, almost relieved. "Thank you," he said, his voice fading into the morning light. "Perhaps now I can find rest." With a final glance at the rows of books, Sarah left the library. She returned often, caring for the books, continuing the legacy that Jonathan Miller had left behind. Story 25. Jake was captivated by the legend of the sunken village of Oldwater, submerged beneath Lake Marrow decades ago after a dam failure. It was said that on clear nights, one could hear the bell of the old church tower still ringing from beneath the waters. One starlit night, Jake set out in his small boat, equipped with only a flashlight and a recorder, hoping to capture the legendary sounds of the submerged village. As he reached the center of the lake, the surface calm and the village long lost below, he cut the engine and waited. The moon reflected off the water, creating a serene yet eerie atmosphere. Minutes ticked by in silence. Then faintly at first, Jake heard it, the sound of a bell, its chimes slow and melancholic, echoing through the night. He recorded the sounds, the hairs on his neck standing on end. The chimes grew louder, and Jake felt a chill despite the calm weather. The water around his boat began to ripple, as if something or someone was moving beneath the surface. He shone his flashlight into the water, catching glimpses of old stone structures and what looked like movement in the shadows. Suddenly, a soft, sorrowful voice whispered through the air, blending with the bell's chimes. "Remember us," it said, the words barely audible over the lapping waves. Frozen with a mix of fear and awe, Jake listened as the voice continued, recounting tales of the village, its joys and its sudden demise. The voice spoke of lost loves and lives interrupted, pleading for their memories to live on. As the last chime faded, so did the voice, leaving Jake alone on the silent lake. He returned to shore, profoundly moved by the experience. He knew he had to share the story of Old Water to ensure that the village and its stories did not remain lost to the depths. If you enjoy this video, subscribe for more videos.